Good afternoon everybody and welcome to another Safer Everyday event. Slightly different time, so possibly that might be indicating why we may not have as many people, but thankfully we are recording this and it will be available on the gov.gg/Safer Everyday website page, which everybody is able to access, and it hosts every single session we do in Safer Everyday. So please do go there afterwards, or please alert your colleagues to it. Today we've hosted this session as an extra session. This would have been a QI clinic in the diary, but because our last presentation session overran, we didn't get the chance to listen to the second presentation by Lucy Bisson and Sue Duff, and that was in relation to perinatal mental health. So thankfully Lucy's been able to help us today and share information around perinatal mental health and the services and the assistance that people might need, and what is available to people in the bailiwick. So I'm going to hand straight over to Lucy and Sue, and they will present their information. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon everyone. Thank you for attending. I'm Sue Duff, Quality Improvement Manager for Mental Health Alderney in the prison, and have a background of perinatal mental health clinical nurse specialist in New Zealand.
And I'm Lucy, and I work as a lecturer 4 days a week, and then I continue to work clinically 1 day a week at Healthy Minds, and continue to have a specialist interest in supporting women in pregnancy and that postnatal period.
Okay, that's our introductions. So the key principles that we're looking at, we're going to look at some facts, statistics of perinatal mental health, what to look for, what and how you can make a difference because your interventions may be crucial, how to complete a postnatal depression screening tool and ask those risky questions, and why and when we refer on and to whom, and what a good referral should look like. And the reason that we're doing this is from a swarm that took place where some of these things weren't known, and myself and Lucy agreed that we would come and do a presentation on perinatal mental health, and we'd stress that this isn't a training, it is very much a presentation.
And I suppose usually this is done as a workshop over a whole morning and is very interactive, and so today is just a whistle-stop tour of perinatal mental health, so if you have got an interest then you can speak and find out for additional training from there.
Yep, and if you can keep the questions to the end, that would be great.
So we've got a little quiz to start you off with.
So we don't want you to do you don't need to write this down. We just want you to think about the questions as they come up, and we'll ask you those at the end and give you the answers. So we're looking at PND, postnatal depression, affects only women. Just think whether you think that's true or false. What percentage of mums do you think will still have postnatal depression when their baby is 1 year of age? And 50% of mothers with postnatal depression will not seek help. True or false? 1 in 7 to 1 in 10 new mums will experience postnatal depression. Again, true or false? And clinical postnatal depression for new mothers is between 0.1% to 1%. True or false? And page 2 of your quiz is 10% of new fathers will experience postnatal depression. True or false? Postnatal depression generally lasts between 1 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months, or 9 to 12 months. And what percentage of women who have had postnatal depression make a full recovery? Number 9 is 1 in 10 experience postnatal depression in pregnancy. True or false? And the last question for that part of the quiz is awareness of postnatal depression first took place in 1980, 1990 or 2000. And looking at all these ladies on this page, just consider which one you think is the odd one out. Okay.
So just starting on then kind of screening tools, and screening tools can be used by any healthcare practitioner. It's just really important to remember using a screening tool, quite often you absolutely need to have a conversation with someone to elaborate. Screening tools are what they say they are, they're a screen, they're to support that further discussion. So as per NICE guidance, it's suggested that every interaction with a woman in pregnancy or the postnatal period, we would at least ask the two Hooley questions. So that is, during the past month, have you often been bothered by feeling down, depressed or hopeless? And then during the past month, have you often been bothered by having little interest or pleasure in doing things? In addition to this, the NICE guidance suggests as well that we ask the GAD2 questionnaires, and that is, in over the past 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by feelings of being nervous, anxious or on edge, and how often over the past 2 weeks have you not been able to stop or control worry? So we ask that in addition to these questions. And the proviso of that is that if someone is answering yes to either of the questions, or how they're presenting to you would suggest that their presentation doesn't fit with what they're answering on that questionnaire, they could be at higher risk of developing any kind of mental illness within pregnancy, whether that is depression, anxiety. So it's really key that we are asking those as a bare minimum of our service users. And then this is just the addition that I was saying before, that where there's a clinical concern, because sometimes we might be with someone and they answer negative on those questions, but how they appear in front of us, we just think this doesn't quite fit, and that's really important to keep asking questions, and that's where a clinical tool won't do the job for you.
So, risk factors for postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety and postpartum psychoses. This actually comes from this book, When Baby Brings the Blues, by Dr. Ariel Delphin, and it is an extremely good tool when you're meeting a lady or a father for the first time to go through and look for the risk factors. So depression or anxiety while you're pregnant, because lots of people think you only have anxiety or depression postpartum. You've got a personal or family history of mental illness, and that could be mild, moderate, severe, doesn't matter which, but that is crucial. You have a history of hormone-related mood problems, so bipolar, could be fluctuating, you could be having the cyclic presentation, need to know about that. Thyroid problems. People with thyroid problems in pregnancy present as depressed. So if the thyroid's treated, you can then often see a clearer picture and there's no pure presentation of postpartum depression there. You have negative thinking patterns, because you're going to ruminate and continue to process and look for the negative in everything you're doing. You're a worrier or perfectionist. My experience, the perfectionist is always the one that you worry about, because they have to do things 110% right. There is no middle ground. And so their expectation of themselves far outweighs what they're able to achieve with a new baby or in pregnancy. History of abuse or significant conflict with parents, I would also say in there, and other relationships, because I've had people with brothers or sisters, cousins, aunts, that has impacted, and Lucy will talk more around the history of abuse and what that looks like, but that is a crucial one. In my experience, there are very few ladies I've looked after that haven't had a history of abuse. Body image issues. Experiencing stressful events during pregnancy or when the baby is born. This doesn't just apply for females, this can apply to the fathers. One of the fathers that I looked after was asked by the consultant to go and see the mother, and when I saw the mother, she was actually on recovery, she was on the way back up. I actually used an Edinburgh postnatal depression scale rating tool with the father, and he was scoring 29 out of 30. So we had him come in immediately, and his was all around, he'd witnessed this traumatic birth of his child and his wife, both of them almost dying, and he could not shift that, and this was approximately 6 months after the birth of the baby. And as a general rule of thumb, if the baby is around 6 months, the mother is starting to come back up, and it'll be the father that starts to go down. Serious money problems. goes without saying. Weak support systems. The lady that actually generated this presentation had got very, very weak support systems. Disappointed about the baby's gender. People don't think that's important, but I had a lady that I looked after who firmly wanted a little girl, had a little boy, couldn't tell anybody that she wasn't happy that she got a little boy, that it was causing her distress, and that for her, the huge amount of guilt, she'd got a healthy baby boy and she wasn't happy, so why could she not be happy, and who could she tell? And there was only me that she could actually talk to. And it was having that conversation and normalising how she was feeling and giving her some resources around that that actually led to her recovery. Colicky baby or sick baby. Anybody that's had a baby knows what sleep deprivation feels like. I worked with a consultant who did a huge study on postpartum depression, and he actually aligned everything to that sleep deprivation and looking at that in depth. Complications with your pregnancy or delivery, a teenager, because you might not have the emotional ability to deal with situations, and your pregnancy was or is unwanted. I've looked after ladies that have been raped and ended up pregnant, and how they dealt with that during the pregnancy and the impact for them, and serious fertility issues.
I think maybe please. What does PPP stand for?
Postpartum psychosis.
Psychosis. And
Yeah.
P is anxiety.
Yep. And D is depression.
Thank you.
So I want you to look at these two images, and I want you to think which one of these, given that list of risk factors that we've just talked about, which one of these ladies do you think is more at risk of developing a postpartum presentation? Any offers?
Trick question.
No.
On the left.
The one on the left? Any offers on the one on the left? Left? Yeah. The lady on the right having a beer and a smoke and everything else is really easy to sort because you put services in to support them. This lady, we have to understand where her anxiety, what her compulsions are, and how can we assist and address those. And Lucy and I have both had a conversation that the two professions that we probably dread getting a referral for more than anything was this professional lady who is in her 30s, who is a nurse or a teacher. And I'd put teachers at the top every time, because the baby doesn't do what the book tells them to do.
So generally, there's quite a bit of research to say that sort of women having children later on in life who have had quite a very good career behind them, have been in sort of positions of quite high power, that when they come to have children might be more likely to struggle with things like anxiety, because yeah, absolutely, as Sue said, with children doesn't come any form of control.
No. The baby is the manual, is what I used to tell people, because they would say, but the book doesn't tell, the book says they should be doing X or Y, and they're not. And I ask the question to everybody that I've met, so has the baby read the book? And they look at you as if you've lost your marbles and say, well, of course not, they can't read. So I said, so why are you relying on the book? Because they've not read it, they don't know that's what they're to follow. They are your manual.
Yeah. So just thinking about postnatal postnatal anxiety, really. I'm not going to read through everything on the slides, they're there just for your information, but it's actually really common, anxiety, and whilst we see it more so post-delivery, actually when you look back you can track that someone had anxiety in pregnancy. And I think the biggest thing with anxiety is trying to pick apart what is normal anxiety related to pregnancy. So i.e. Worrying about getting to that 3-month scan. Is there going to be a heartbeat on that scan? So there's those normal anxieties in pregnancy, and also when baby is then with us, compared to what's then excessive anxiety. And I suppose thinking about this, I think of someone that I worked with who, when I met them, they were experiencing severe anxiety. But actually when we tracked it back, some of the very early signs were around those first 12 weeks waiting for that scan, and reoccurrent trips to the GP, and asking for blood tests to confirm the pregnancy, asking for the scan to be brought forward. And for me, that is an indicator of that kind of excessive anxiety that is above what we would expect for anyone to be experiencing pregnancy.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest takeaway with anxiety, trying to not normalise you're feeling like this because of pregnancy, okay? And it's the impact that it has on that person's day-to-day living.
And when you're pregnant and you've got anxiety, it impacts on the fetus as well. So when the baby's born, you can quite often have a very, very agitated, anxious baby.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose the only other thing to add in, there's been quite a lot of research recently around people accessing fertility treatment, and it's kind of come on the radar, the recognition that actually people that have accessed fertility treatment have had multiple losses should be receiving support kind of from the outset, because they're at higher risk of developing anxiety. If you think about fertility, feeling that sense of out of control, lots of losses, then you get pregnant, you don't know whether you're gonna get to the end and hold your baby, and then even when your baby comes, is there something bad going to happen? So you can see how that develops. So it's it's another thing to just be aware of.
And tying in with the fertility part from depression, and like Lucy, I'm not going to go through the whole list on the slide, but certainly from a fertility perspective, if postnatal depression was an organic situation for a mother, why then do ladies that have had fertility treatment suffer with postnatal depression? Because you would associate that should be something that's biological, and it's not. And there's lots of evidence and research, and I've had personal experience of ladies that have actually adopted a baby and had postnatal depression as well. So depression doesn't manifest as a pure mental health depression would. For postpartum ladies or ladies in pregnancy, it very much presents as a anxiety related presentation, and they won't always tell you that they feel depressed. They will tell you that they can't cope, they've had enough, they want to give up, but they won't actually use the word depression. And it's only when you start to unpick and get their trust and probe that they actually start to give you the information that you're looking for. And their belief, they have a very, very fixed belief that if I admit that I've got any of this going on, social services are going to come in and take my baby away from me. So if I don't tell you I've got any of this and I deal with it, because all my friends, when I go to mother and baby groups or I go out, are immaculately dressed, they're all coping. So it's something about me, I'm a bad mother, I can't cope, but I can't share that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think when we think of diagnosing depression within generic mental health, we're often looking about someone's level of functioning. So quite often you'll see someone not getting up, lack of routine, staying in bed, you'll see someone unkempt, and you'll really kind of see those visible signs not working. Now then, when we think about someone who's on maternity and with a baby, well, one, they're not working, so we can't use that as a kind of judge, but also what you'll see is a woman will function because that baby needs to be fed, it needs the nappy changed, and that those parents will do that and engage in that process. And quite often I've seen where someone's been said, well, they don't meet this threshold of care because they're functioning. But what it's about really asking that individual, when you're changing your baby's nappy, are you engaged with the baby? How do you feel about that? When you're feeding the baby, what do you notice? Are you enjoying it? Do you really get, do you get a warmth feeling inside you when you're doing that? And it's those bits that are often the indicators that come out that actually I'm going to the park, but I'm there, but I'm physically there, but I'm not mentally there. And that's the biggest one.
And I'd say also looking when you go in the home, look at what they're doing in the home. Have they got the baby just propped up in front of the TV? Because frequently that's what you'll see. And there's that emotional detachment from the baby. Evidence-based research says that if we can't get this right at this age, the attachment issues for the baby pose issues later in life as well.
Yeah. So just thinking about history of sexual abuse, it's really important. If we think about someone engaging in maternity services, from the get-go there has to be some physical interaction there, and so absolutely it's really important that all services are aware that any kind of physical interaction could lead to someone feeling re-traumatised and activating previous trauma. So what's really good is that I know within midwifery, in their booking form, they ask this routinely. Obviously we're relying on someone being able to talk to us about this. Somebody might have never told anyone about this. But why it's kind of on the radar is that in the most recent Embrace report, they actually said that the women that had committed suicide, whilst they'd not had links with mental health services, they had significant trauma history. And that's trauma globally, not just sexual abuse, but it's really important to think about that. And they suggest that we have to move forward with that trauma-informed care. And I've had experiences where someone has gone through pregnancy, been doing really well, and then they've had a complicated delivery and it's activated that trauma for them, and they've then shown quite early signs indicative of a potential PTSD diagnosis later on down the line.
And I'd agree with that, Lucy. I've had people where they've actually had re-trauma through PTSD during the actual stages of the pregnancy, and working with midwives has been crucial to alleviate that. And I always say there is an invisible link between the womb and the brain for women that have had past experience of sexual abuse trauma, because it just triggers at some stage. Without exception, I don't think there's anybody I've had that hasn't had that trigger going off.
And I think where someone is open about a history of trauma, and particularly sexual abuse, it's really important to coordinate services and develop a care plan that looks at all of those triggers and how we might be able to support that individual. And it might even be down to that this person cannot opt for a vaginal delivery and that they would like a C-section, which I know is quite challenging when we think about the complications that come with that. Okay. So moving on then, just thinking about postpartum psychosis. So this is classed as a psychiatric emergency. Historically, research would have us believe that people would present within the first 24, 48 hours. Actually, when we do some reading around this topic and from clinical experience, people can present up to the first month. And when we think of postpartum psychosis, we often think about someone might have odd beliefs or odd ideas that we might call delusions. But realistically, someone presents as very anxious. Almost, if you think about a manic presentation where someone is overexcitable, very disorganised, and you can tell things like that with like breastfeeding. So you can observe someone breastfeeding and you'll see the baby on and off, nipple shield on and off, and you just it will feel very disorganised. And that's usually some of those early signs, rather than it being about someone having some odd beliefs about their baby, but that can happen as well. The biggest thing with this telltale sign is sleep disturbance. And I think another key factor with postpartum psychosis is asking people that know that individual, so whether it be partner or close family member, is your family member acting out of character to you? Do you think that? Because they know these people. And I think that's the biggest thing. I remember watching a documentary, and that was the one thing that hadn't happened. They hadn't spoken to the partner. But after, he was saying, you know, she was posting photos in her nightdress on social media. That's not my wife. And it's stuff like that that you really take into consideration. But it actually develops quite rapidly, and that's why it's a concern, because you can see someone at 1 o'clock and by 1:30 they're really, really unwell.
The quickest one I've ever seen was, I said to Lucy earlier, was 6 minutes after the birth, roughly, and the mother was starting to talk about the guns in the husband's house, and so we had to get the guns out of the house. Another one that I've had, and I think cultural consideration has to come into this as well, was a lady from Malaysia who was speaking in tongues and didn't want to come into hospital because of the shame. We left her for as long as we possibly could, but had to bring her in. But for her, if she'd have gone back to Malaysia to be treated with the mum, then she would have ended up in a psychiatric unit of the old style bins and possibly never been let back out. So we had to work really productively with her and have trust with her in how we managed her psychoses.
And I suppose a big thing here is that so we, you know, it can happen to anyone, but actually when you look back, so when you then have worked with someone who has developed postpartum psychosis, when you then track back actually throughout their life, there have been periods where there's been a mood component to their picture. It's just that they've potentially gone under the radar and not accessed support. So I would say for anyone where there is a concern, you know, be looking for that mood component in someone's life prior. And I'm not saying it does mean that they're going to develop postpartum psychosis, but you just have that in your mind.
And being aware if they've had it once before, they're at a much increased risk of having it again. Doesn't always follow that they're going to have it, but you need to be aware and look for it.
Yeah.
Because they'll mask it.
Yeah. And I suppose the biggest thing when we think about kind of child protection within this scenario is obviously the parents that I've worked with that have experienced postpartum psychosis are absolutely, they don't want any harm to come to their baby, and usually that's the kind of underlying thoughts of that. But it's the neglect that comes with that. So if you think about that disorganised picture of feeding that I said to you, what you'll find is potentially the baby not gaining weight, and so therefore it's almost like neglect by proxy. It's because that person in that postpartum psychosis can't organise their thoughts and then obviously meet the needs of that baby. So in those situations, I think it is key to look at getting the support in, and whilst there is a fear, I think generally, and a stigma around my baby being taken away from me, it's about let's get all the support and support this individual. And I suppose on Island, just thinking, so the best outcomes is for a woman and their baby to go to a mother and baby unit. And obviously locally we don't have that, but we do have the option of using UK facilities. That is on the proviso that the other parent agrees to the baby going. But I suppose the one good thing is if we can treat postpartum psychosis really quickly, we can usually try and avoid an off-island admission, but it has got the best outcomes. So it should be a kind of gold star standard for anyone experiencing this.
And people with postpartum psychosis, once they've been treated, recover really quickly. It's rapid, and it's not, also just as an afterthought, Lucy, it's not to be confused with a psychotic presentation in depression, because they have got similarities, but they are vastly different and take a hell of a lot longer to recover from. And I had a lady that had a psychotic depression and literally threw the baby off her down the bed, and if there hadn't been a nurse in the room with her to catch the baby, something could have happened. She was mortified when she became well, because she could remember everything that she'd done. And I think that's another myth, that people don't remember what's happened to them when they're having a postpartum psychosis. They do, and they are re-traumatised, so giving them opportunity to debrief as well is crucial.
Yeah. And with all, anxiety, depression, postpartum psychosis, it's really key to keep the mum involved as much as you can. with the baby, obviously completing that risk assessment around kind of mum and baby, because the mum not having that, it affects that development of that bond, but also affects her kind of developing those skills with that baby, and then she'll become well and then be faced with this baby that she hasn't made that connection with, she doesn't know those kind of cues and things like that, which then can feed into anxiety and depression as well. So it is really key. Okay. So just moving forward then, so Embrace UK, I think it's really important. So this is what we work towards when we're thinking about kind of practices, and Embrace kind of, they're really key in the development of kind of nice guidance and that. This was a report that was done back in 2017 to 2019. There is a newer one out, so I've got some of the updated stuff, but these generally have stayed the same. So they talk about red flags and now amber flags. And what they say is that if there's any presentation of even just one of the red flags, then that is escalating to specialist services, and amber flags, that is kind of consideration, but absolutely you would be flagging up to services as well, specialist services. So from this report, they actually said that the biggest thing was about sharing information. So if someone's open to a GP and the GP's got some information, that they're sharing that with the midwives, and vice versa. If someone's open to mental health, that pregnancy is shared, but also that mental health is sharing that information. So that was a big thing from that report. And you can see there, the real thing was about those new thoughts or acts of self-harm, but violent self-harm, and you'll see that as a difference. It will be quite violent methods. And then in 2018 to 2020, so this is the most recent report, they said that in 2020 women were 3 times more likely to die by suicide during the 6 weeks postpartum compared to the 2017 to 2019 report, and that 2/3 of women were more likely to use violent methods. And I think that's the big thing. When you're thinking about risk of suicide in this period, women tend to use those more violent methods, whether that be jumping from high buildings, walking out in front of transport, so buses, trains, cars, having access to guns, hanging,
shooting.
but usually things that are very, once they're done, they're done. And I think that's really key to bear in mind here.
And I think both Lucy and I have conferred, and neither one of us in our experience have ever had a lady present with an overdose. Not ever.
Or with thoughts of an overdose in that
it's
kind of
always
postnatal
those
period.
violent.
Yeah. And again, as I said before, what's come out of the most recent report is that whilst a lot of women weren't accessing formal specialist support in the form of whether that be generic mental health services or perinatal mental health services, they had a significant history of trauma. And actually, it was 20% of the women that died actually had accessed social services. So they're seeing a correlation there as well, and it's something for us to kind of bear in mind about that, because on one hand there's the stigma about having support in place, of that fear of removal of children, and from looking at some of the UK stats, there is some kind of discussion at the minute that the rates of removal of children have gone up. So that fear is going to be there, but at the same time you need to think about the appropriate support for the individual. Yep. So what do we already know about someone diagnosed with enduring mental illness? Well, when we're talking about that, we're talking about bipolar, schizophrenia, severe depression, and these are all illnesses that at some point that person has probably had to be a service user in an inpatient facility. They've potentially been under the mental health law at some point. Sometimes we hear that when we hear the word postpartum psychosis relayed with people that have an enduring mental illness, and that's a bit of a misconception, because someone who's already got a diagnosed enduring mental illness, they don't develop postpartum psychosis. They have a relapse of their illness. Okay. And that is more common in the third trimester. And if someone's on medication, and without going into it too much, but if you think about the body, as you move through the trimesters, there's less medication in your body, so you're more likely to have some of those symptoms in that third trimester. So you might have to think with medication there. But yes, they're more likely to relapse. I think it's about 60% more likely to relapse in pregnancy, third trimester and postnatally. But again, I think it's just really clear that that's about relapse. So we would be care planning for that individual because they have an enduring mental illness, recognising the risk of relapse in pregnancy.
And involving them in their care so that they're aware and know what to look for as well.
Yeah. And generally, again, best practice is that someone with an enduring mental illness who is pregnant should be involved with secondary mental health services as soon as they find out they're pregnant. Now, they might be well, but that doesn't matter. You obviously can offer the support that you can. So at the beginning you might see someone monthly, but if their presentation changes, you obviously see them more frequently. But absolutely to that third trimester you would be seeing them every week. And absolutely when they're delivering, you would see them daily over on the maternity ward, and then when they go home for at least the first 2 weeks you would be having kind of daily contact with that individual, and then gradually spreading that out. So yeah, that's they should be linked in with services. So just thinking about risk, exploring risk, and I know a lot of people that I've worked with sort of in midwifery, with the health visitors, a lot of people would worry about asking about risk because they would say, I'm going to put that in someone's mind. If they've not thought about it, if I ask about it, it's then going to seem like an option. That's not the case. Asking about it doesn't make someone then think about suicide. Asking about it makes them realise that this is common for people to have thoughts like this. And generally, how I explain it to people is that, you know, if they're really distressed or they're really struggling, a symptom of that can be suicidal thoughts, and that's why it's really important we talk to that individual. And this is a kind of a little model that just talks about, helps us kind of differentiate between high risk, low risk, moderate risk, and it includes all of those factors. So obviously there's some fixed factors, so around age, race, it could be certain things around history of their illness. It could be certain things relating to the pregnancy, so whether it's an unwanted pregnancy, separation with partner, that kind of stuff. And then also you've got your environmental risk factors, and that's kind of been classed as quite a big thing at the minute with regards to lower socioeconomic background, so people having more challenges with regards to their mental health, and then our psychosocial difficulties, and again thinking around that. The biggest thing is ask about ideation, ask about plan, you know, explore, you know, what stops you doing that. And actually in the perinatal period, a lot of people will say, my child is my protective factor, but in the training that I've attended, it's a very finite between them being a protective factor and not a protective factor. So you always explore, is there other protective factors outside of their child or children?
And ask, if they identify a means, ask and what else, and keep asking and what else until you've exhausted every single option that they're carrying with them. And it's the relationship, building that relationship with somebody so they feel comfortable and safe to give you that information.
Yeah, and it's this information that you want when you're accessing other services. So if you're wanting to put in that referral to specialist services, this is the information they'll want you to come with as well. So it's about exploring that and then thinking, right, this is why we need to get this service involved. So there's a lot of stuff that we can all do if we're working with someone who present at low risk and with a mild presentation. Medication isn't kind of the recommended start point. It is this sort of stuff around sleep hygiene, distraction techniques, and there's lots of online material as an example there that you can guide people to. And what I would always say is, if you're worried about someone, always offer then a follow-up appointment, whether it be a week or 2 weeks, and use that as your watch and wait. And if someone is still then struggling, that is then when you would be getting additional support in place.
And this is just something that a psychiatrist developed that I've used on numerous occasions, that works beautifully for women that do not want to take an antidepressant, either in pregnancy or postpartum, but they're quite willing to take foods that will enhance mood. I used to, there was a chocolate company called Whittaker's in New Zealand. They used to give me a box of chocolate every year, of the high content cocoa chocolate, and if people were struggling to get in, I'd take a bar of chocolate to the door and ask if I could come in. I'd bought them some chocolate and I just wanted to talk to them, and it invariably let me in. The big one is omega-3, and people would say, can you take that when while you're pregnant? Yes, you can. It's really healthy brain food, especially in semester 3 for babies. So it's just a sheet of information that people are most welcome when they go on, if they want to look at it. Certainly omega-3 works well for ladies with menopause presentations as well.
So if you're working with someone and you've maybe given them some self-help or guided them to that, and things are still really difficult for that individual, remember back earlier I asked you that you could use those screening tools, so the Hooley questions and the GAD2. So they're 4 questions looking at mood and anxiety. Well, at this point, you could then look at using some other tools. So NICE guidance says that we can use the Edinburgh Postnatal Depression Scale or the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7. Now, generally, I've always stuck to the PHQ and the GAD-7 just because it's a universal language. Our GPs use it, Healthy Minds use it, secondary services are aware of those. So it just reduces any risk of some misinterpretation. So you could then use that tool as well as then your conversation with that individual. There is the MESH service, which is run by the health visiting team, and that offers kind of additional sessions with the health visitor, looked at being preemptive and looking at working with parents around the stages of children, but trying to think about those stages before they come. For example, weaning, but thinking about that before they get to that really stressful time of weaning a baby. Yeah. So there is a mental health nurse that is part-time on the MESH programme, and I would say for some individuals it'd be really paramount that they would be offered the MESH programme. But again, it is a voluntary programme, and it's based on the woman and their family wanting to do that. You've also got Healthy Minds, who offer online computerised CBT, so cognitive behavioural therapy, called Silver Cloud. They also offer individual one-to-one sessions, and absolutely women in pregnancy and postnatal would be prioritised as per NICE guidance. There's also the workshops that they offer, and there's a lot of stuff in the community with regards to Home Start, Bright Beginnings. There's a lot of stuff out there. I could go on and on about that, but yeah, it's just knowing that there are support mechanisms in place. And then just thinking, obviously, from that point, what are then our thresholds of where we would be considering specialist mental health services, so secondary mental health, and where we might be thinking about primary care, so thinking Healthy Minds or asking someone to go and see their GP again. So obviously specialist mental health services, we're thinking about that there is some suicidal ideation. Even if there's ideation, I would be having a conversation with a specialist service. If there's a plan, absolutely. If there's an increase in frequency of self-harm, absolutely. And again, you can see how these mark against the red flags. And if there's a moderate to severe presentation, so that might be that you just see someone and actually you think, no, this is more moderate to severe right now. So absolutely, that's the criteria for secondary services. And then Healthy Minds work with people where they're presenting with mild to moderate presentations, where they're potentially still engaging in day-to-day activities, but where possible self-help materials haven't really helped them and they need a bit more support. They might have thoughts of wanting to go to sleep and not wake up, but that's very different to wanting to be dead. And I think it's really important to differ that. So those are the thresholds for both services. So we're now back to the answers for the quiz.
Back to the quiz. So PND only affects women. And just ask the audience, true or false? False? Yep. What percentage of mums will have PND when their baby is 1 year of age? 10, 15 or 25%? Yeah, 25%.
Well done.
Yeah. 50% of mothers with PND will not seek help, true or false? True.
Yeah.
1 in 7 to 1 in 10 new mothers experience PND, true or false? True. Clinical PND for new mothers is between 0.1 to 1%, true or false? It's false. False, it's 10 to 20%. And then 10% of new fathers experience PND, true or false? True. With 50% of men whose partners have had postnatal depression, they experience depression themselves, which is a colossal amount of husbands, fathers that I don't think get seen. I think they get missed because PND tends to, people in PND tend to focus primarily on the woman, and we should be looking at the whole family as a unit.
There's a lot of work gone on recently looking at support for dads, and I think whenever you're working in a specialist service, you'd be asking those questions to the family members or the people that are there, and absolutely encouraging that person or putting a referral in for that individual to seek other support.
What about the wider, immediate wider family? So a sibling, say,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence around that as well?
I haven't seen much around that, but obviously there is some generic research, isn't there, around like siblings struggling with a new baby coming into the household and that, but I've not seen specific around this. Other than what we're looking at is so a parent or parents presenting with depression, and the impact that has on a child, an older child in the family home.
And I've had families where all the sisters in a family have all experienced PND.
Yeah. There's a strong link on the maternal side.
Yeah.
So that's another question I'd be asking someone.
Yeah.
Has your mum,
Yeah,
grandmother,
definitely.
so definitely on the maternal side,
Yeah.
any mental illness,
Yeah.
you would use that as a bit of a predictor.
Yeah. PND generally lasts between 1 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 9 or 9 to 12 months. What do you think?
9 to 12?
3 to 6.
Well, you did say it's 6 months the woman's coming out and the man's going.
Yeah, 3
Yeah.
to 6.
And there's a really nice graph that goes along with this, and I think just think about the kind of challenges now. So for some women, they don't get maternity leave, so they're going back within those 3 months. Some might get 6 months, they'll go back at 6 months, and some might go back after a year. And there's a really nice scale that shows women presenting to services. There's a peak at 3 months, then things go down. There's a peak at 6, they go down, and a peak at 12. And it's usually those major kind of stages. I don't think it is just work, I think it's other development stuff and wider issues, but it is interesting that
And
those.
we always used to say, psychiatrists I work with always used to say, every 3 months there'll be a change, and we always used to try to plan with the husband at the 6-week point after baby's born, try and have a long weekend off, and you take over looking after baby, because that's when mum is going to hit that wall. So yeah, so those tie in very much to what you're saying, Lucy. So what percentage of women who have postnatal depression make a full recovery? 80%, which is pretty good. I think it's probably one of the highest recovery rates in mental health, I would say.
Yeah.
1 in 10 women experience PND in pregnancy, true or false? What do you think? False. 1 in 8, 1 in 10 experience postnatal depression. Yeah. Awareness of PND first took place in 1980, 1990 or 2000. What do you think? Yeah?
Can I put it out?
No, 2000, no, sorry, 1980. I was going to say it later than it was,
And
1980.
but if you look at books predating that, we
Yeah.
talk about like back in like the Victorian times, I
Yeah.
forgot what they called it, hysteria, like
Yes.
hysteria, like,
That's where the
Yeah.
hysterectomy.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah. And
Yeah.
it was coined by the obstetricians and the doctors because of to do with the womb.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
I would say it was much older than 1980, but as you say,
Yeah.
formal.
The formal, yeah.
but it's I think it's an area, Vicky, that has really escalated very quickly in research and in intervention, because in 1980 there was very little. It was still had a huge stigma, and I can remember going into a bin when I was doing my training and finding records where in 1960 somebody was institutionalised for having a baby and having depression and never came out.
Yeah.
So I think we've had a great trajectory, and I
Yeah.
think there's a lot more we can still do.
And in was it about 2010, between 2010 and 2013, there was a lot, because obviously there was a doctor who had postpartum psychosis, and she took her own life and her baby's life,
Yeah.
and that triggered how are we supporting people. And that's when then some of the first Embrace reports came out, and then in 2013 we started seeing this need for perinatal services, and then obviously we then had government funding and stuff like that. So it's really taken quite a big jump in the last 10 years.
And I can remember looking after a lady in one of the prisons that had killed her baby because the voices, schizophrenia, had told her to do that God told her she was going to test her, and if she dropped the baby off the bridge, he would catch it and bring it back to her. And of course she dropped the baby off the bridge and it didn't happen. And she was on 24-hour continual watch because she had recovered and could not live with herself with what she'd done. She lost her whole family, husband, other children, everything. And it was purely and simply because somebody had changed her medication halfway through her pregnancy and hadn't notified secondary services to provide that level of support and assistance. So yeah. So who do you think the odd one out is on all of these lovely ladies? No? It's a trick question. There isn't an odd one out. Every single one of these ladies has had postpartum depression or postnatal depression. And I actually think it's, Brooke Shields has done an awful lot of work, and that was around the 1980s, around postnatal depression.
Thank you very much for your time today. Like I said, whistle stop tour, but if there's any questions, please do shout. I think we've got 2 minutes left, yeah.
We've got opportunity if there is. I've asked the question on the Teams if there is any questions, so I'll just watch out for them on there. But I would just like to say thank you very much. It's really, it's such an interesting topic, and yes, it has come on in a long way in a relatively short period of time, although it's obviously been around a lot longer, but with that lack of recognition, I think continuing to break down the stigma that still surrounds mental health in general, and all the anxieties that people have around will their child be taken away from them. It's working through all of that, and that need for us to be involving all services rather than just working in isolation and silos. And we know that we struggle within HSC at times with being able to share information, making sure we're talking to the right people and the right people know that information. And it's just, here's a great example where this is what's required of us. So thank you. It doesn't look like there's any questions on Teams. Has anybody in the room got questions?
If we do have a concern, who are we referring to?
Yeah, so women can self-refer to Healthy Minds. So at that level of kind of mild, moderate, people can self-refer to Healthy Minds, and also GPs can look at supporting women at that point. If you're thinking more moderate to severe, then you would be referring into the duty and intervention team within specialist mental health services. But what I would say is it's really important that you phone and have a conversation with them first, and explore that with them, because there might be alternative options that they might discuss with you. But absolutely, I think the key take home from this for anyone is early intervention is key. And quite often someone in pregnancy and postnatal might present as that they're doing absolutely okay, but you're still working with them. It's because the potential of that risk is higher there, and it's the impact that it has on the woman, the child. You know, it's kind of vast. So yeah, the take home for me would be that early intervention, and those are the services that you would.
And it doesn't really matter who could refer in. It could be anybody who happens to witness that. I mean, does it?
Generally has to be a doctor.
I believe that they've still got, so there was some work, so when I was in the role within secondary services, I did a lot of work with health visitors and midwives to help develop their knowledge around mental health, and we got to the point where they were able to refer directly in. So we did have a form. The only thing is that might be slightly different. Yeah, but I believe
I think that's still
is that so the health visitors and midwives, could refer directly in.
For the likes of you, Charlotte, that would be sort of how you would potentially get them in, is in that, depending what scenario you come across them with.
Yeah, and I suppose, I don't know, use an example, you're in the emergency department and someone presents and they're pregnant, and maybe you're not sure, you think something's a bit off, you might phone and just check, is this person on your radar? If they're not, okay, and then it might be about giving that to the midwives and the GP, but if it is then on their radar, they will then know that that person is now presented to ED, you know, because that can present a picture of maybe someone's deteriorating. So I think working in a small community, it's really key that we have that open communication, and you know, I would hope that absolutely you could phone with concerns and they would give you the right advice and support and whether that is for services to be involved or not.
And going on the conversation we had yesterday with Alderney, doing some training in Alderney with the new manager of duty, very, very receptive to phone calls and concerns, and will respond very quickly.
Is the referral made through track? Like obviously, you know, phone and speak to them. But
Claire was saying you can pick the phone and just ask the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Sorry I was late. Your figures sort of indicate there's about 40, potentially 40 cases a year from the percentage you showed. Does that bear out from the facts over here?
So you're looking at about 10% actually. So there's up to 10% of women will experience moderate to severe challenges with their mental health in pregnancy and postnatal. So I think we're around 600, but 550, 600, 550.
We're about 550 at the moment. We've dropped a bit over the last couple of years.
Yeah. So you're talking about, I think I always worked on the basis of around 50 at that higher end, kind of moderate to severe.
Is that what you're seeing?
So when I was in the role within secondary services, absolutely. And the thing that you've got to think about is the input that you're offering. It's not 12 sessions.
No.
So yes, the recovery can be 3 to 6 months, but actually quite often you're working with someone for about a year. So the input is longer, and because you're doing that preventative, so you might have someone open, it might even be longer than a year, because you'll have someone open through pregnancy and then after. And so absolutely, you know, maybe in those last months you might be only reviewing someone once a month, but it's kind of that safety net. But yeah, definitely I would say the statistics are still there. And now with my day a week in Healthy Minds, I think for the mild to moderate presentations, it fits additional, but those presentations would be additional to those 10%. Yeah.
Ours was a lot lower threshold. We didn't do moderate to severe, we took everything because we didn't have Healthy Minds or primary services that took them. So we were averaging 30 referrals a month on average.
Any other questions?
There is one on Teams that's
There is
come in.
one on Teams.
Yeah.
Oh, why can I not see it?
Alex, is there any research around transgender parents?
There is from what I've seen.
So there is quite a bit, and I actually need to take some time to read around that.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is about changing our language. So I try to, hopefully you've noticed it through the session today, other parent, because quite often we're not talking about, a mum and a dad. We're talking about two mums, and so I think it's really important to remember that. But there is. And I think you just ultimately, regardless of gender, you're supporting those parents with their well-being in order to be able to parent those children. But there is some research, but I haven't actually spent a lot of time looking at that to date.
Thank you for that, Ollie, because I'm apologising to Alex right now. It's only just come up on my screen on my phone, so I wasn't there when I looked. I apologise, Alex. Thank you. If that's it from everybody, I'd just like to say thank you again. I'd also just like to point out the Safer Everyday events for next year. The poster will be going out probably tomorrow globally. We have QI clinics every month between 2 and 4, and they are taking place on a Tuesday, venue here and on Teams. And we have presentations again from 2 till 4, once a quarter, 21st of March, 8th of June, 29th of August and the 7th of November. If I just bring the attention to the 10th of January, what we're hoping to do for that is to have Liz Dorry come and talk around end of life, verification of death, and we're trying to upgrade and update the policy and the process around how we do that and what that looks like to ensure we're meeting potential legal constraints. So we're hoping to use that session to highlight that information. I will also plug that either this week or next week there will be a further global going out highlighting that we are offering 50 places on the IHI, so the Institute for Healthcare Improvements online open school course it's called a Basic Certificate in Quality and Safety. There's nothing basic about it. Why they've called it that, I don't know. But basically, you will be allowed to have access for a 12-month period to their online open school. There are 13 modules that provide you with a basic certificate. But during that 12-month period, you actually have access to everything that they do. So if you actually knuckled down, you could make real use of that money that is not going to cost you, your department or your line manager, and get some really good knowledge and background into quality and patient safety. The courses are fantastic, they're really in-depth, they're really engaging. I would fully recommend it. So that's by application, so the form will be, I think I'm going to do it via forms online, I'm trying to get with the times, and there'll be 50 places offered, so get your applications in. Your line manager does need to support it. There is an awful lot of needing to do your own sort of study time as well, but your manager needs to support probably about 4 days in a year in that 12-month period. It's a rolling 12 months, so whenever we press the go start button, you have 12 months to complete it. Really worthwhile. And from there, hopefully, or the expectation would be you would then become sort of Safer Everyday patient safety champions and consider how you might do improvements in your area of work to improve outcomes from the people we're supporting. So I'll just plug that. That's coming out soon. Is there a question?
Yes, I was just going to ask if there is any restrictions to that, whether you're permanent or your own agency, or is there any restrictions to?
So the only restriction, there is a bit of a restriction. It doesn't matter what role you play, as in whether you are a registered professional or you're a support worker, that is absolutely fine. I would like to say there is a restriction on agency staff unless we have long-term, relatively permanent agency, because we need to see the investment. We're investing in the service in the hope that we see then the improvements delivered in HSC, and it's our partner organisation, so not just HSC, it's open to people at St John's, it's open to some of the nursing homes, but there's 50 places, but we expect to see that work come to fruition in Guernsey, really. So yeah, there is a restriction around that, I'm afraid. But It's not overly expensive, and I can give you the link and maybe you can register yourself and you could join us but pay for it yourself. And it's not overly expensive. 50 places are, but individual places aren't too bad. So don't not rule it out if it's something you could afford to do yourself. Really good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody, and nice to see you. Have a lovely Christmas. Mince pies at the back for those in the room, sadly not on Teams.